My parents demanded my daughter's college fund for their gifted grandson. Now she's worth $200 million. It wasn't a negotiation, not really. It was a pronouncement, delivered over lukewarm casserole at Thanksgiving dinner, the kind of forced gathering where the air always felt thick with unspoken resentments. Mom, bless her passive-aggressive heart, started it, her voice barely a murmur, as if she were confessing a personal failing rather than committing grand larceny. "Honey, we were thinking," she began, her gaze fixed somewhere between my plate and the floral centerpiece, "about little Alex's future." Alex, my brother's son, the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong even when he was demonstrably screwing up. He was 5 years younger than my daughter, Chloe, and for years my parents had been showering him with attention, with praise, with gifts. Chloe, my bright, funny, art-loving Chloe, was the quiet one, the observer. She didn't demand attention, and so, apparently, she didn't get it. This year, however, was different. This year, the whispers had turned into concrete demands. "We've been talking to your father," Mom continued, twisting her napkin into knots, "and we think it would be best if Chloe's college fund, well, if we redirected it, for Alex. You know how he is, so mechanically inclined. And with the new tech incubator your father is investing in, it's a real opportunity for him, a head start. We want to set him up properly." My fork clattered against my plate. Redirected? Chloe's college fund? The one I'd meticulously saved for, little by little since she was born. The one earmarked for a future that felt increasingly distant and precarious for her, given my own, shall we say, less than stellar financial situation. I worked at a small nonprofit, pouring my heart into something I believed in, but the paychecks reflected that idealism rather than reality. Chloe's education was my single biggest financial priority, a bulwark against the kind of struggles I'd faced. My brother, Mark, sat across from me, a smug, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He'd always been the favorite son, the one who followed the path my parents expected: business school, a good firm, a corner office. He'd married well, too, to a woman who seemed to exist solely to curate their perfect family image. Their kids, Alex and his younger sister Emily, were extensions of that perfection. Alex, with his penchant for dismantling anything with a motor and his surprisingly sharp mind for coding, was the progeny they'd always dreamed of. Chloe, with her sketchpad and her gentle soul, was an anomaly in their meticulously constructed world. "Redirected?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a familiar blush of shame and indignation that I'd spent years trying to suppress. My dad, a man of few words but immense authority, cleared his throat. "Yes, sweetheart," he boomed, his voice cutting through the strained silence. "We think it's the sensible thing to do. Alex has a real aptitude. We see it. Your mother and I see it. And Mark and Sarah see it. It's an investment in his future, a significant one." He gestured vaguely with his fork. "That fund of Chloe, it's a good chunk of change. It could make a real difference for Alex, help him get into a top engineering program, or maybe even start his own venture down the line. We're talking about a substantial sum, a real springboard. A springboard for Alex."
Not for Chloe, who was already showing signs of being an exceptional artist, who devoured books, who had a quiet intensity that hinted at a deep well of talent. Chloe, whose dreams were as bright and vibrant as the colors she used in her artwork. The implication hung heavy in the air. Chloe's future, my hard-earned savings, were less important, less deserving than Alex's. It was a subtle devaluation, a quiet dismissal of her potential in favor of a boy who was already on a gilded path. "But that's Chloe's money," I stammered, feeling utterly outmaneuvered. "I saved that for her college. She wants to go to art school. She's already talking about RISD, about Parsons." I looked at my parents, pleadingly, then at Mark and Sarah. Sarah, ever the picture of polished composure, offered a tight, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, dear," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "And Chloe is a lovely girl, so creative. But opportunities for boys like Alex, with his specific talents, they're rarer. And your parents are just looking out for the family, investing in the one who's most likely to make a significant impact." "An impact?" I echoed, incredulous. "So because Alex is good at fixing things and playing video games, he gets priority over my daughter's education? Because you think he's going to make an impact?" The words tumbled out, sharper than I intended, and the polite facade of the dinner shattered. My mother flinched. My father's jaw tightened. Mark shot me a warning glare.
Don't be dramatic, Sarah, my father said, his voice low and dangerous. This isn't about who's better. This is about recognizing potential and maximizing it. Alex has a clear trajectory. He's going to do great things. And frankly, your little art school dreams for Chloe are, well, they're a bit unrealistic for a family like ours, aren't they? We need to be practical. We need to invest where we'll see a return. The sheer audacity of it all hit me like a physical blow. Not only were they demanding my daughter's future, they were belittling her dreams, her aspirations, her very worth. A return? I whispered, the word catching in my throat. So my daughter's education is just a business transaction to you? Something that needs to show a return? Unlike Alex's, which is a guaranteed investment in your legacy? My mother wrung her hands. Now, darling, don't say that. We love Chloe. We do. It's just Alex is the future. He's the one who will carry on the family name, the business interests. Your father has grand plans for him. You know that. This tech incubator, it's a huge deal. He wants Alex to be involved from the ground up, and that requires capital, significant capital. Your college fund, that's a substantial amount, enough to give him a real boost, a real stake. I looked at my father, at the hard lines etched around his mouth, at the glint of something possessive in his eyes. He saw Alex as an extension of himself, a vessel for his ambition. And Chloe? Chloe was an afterthought, a pretty distraction. My savings, built with years of late nights and scrimped weekends, were suddenly just another asset to be liquidated for his pet project, for his preferred grandchild.
So, what you're saying, I said slowly, trying to process the enormity of their selfishness, is that you want to take the money I saved for Chloe's education, money that represents her future, her chance at a good life, and give it to Alex so he can play with his toys in your fancy incubator? Mark scoffed. It's not just playing, Sarah. Alex is genuinely brilliant. He's already built apps. He understands algorithms. He's going to be a force in the tech world. This is about giving him the best possible start. And honestly, a college fund for art school? It's not exactly a sound investment, is it? Especially when compared to a burgeoning tech empire. The coldness of his words, the calculated dismissal of my daughter's potential, made my blood run cold. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about a deeply ingrained favoritism, a blatant disregard for my child's dreams and my efforts to support them. I felt a flicker of something dark and dangerous ignite within me, a feeling I'd never experienced before. It was the dawning realization that these people, my own parents and brother, saw me, and by extension my daughter, as less valuable. You know what? I said, pushing my plate away. The casserole suddenly seemed utterly repulsive. Chloe is exceptionally talented, more talented than Alex will ever be in his entire life. And her art school dreams are not unrealistic. They are her dreams, and I will support them, no matter what you think or what you demand. My mother's eyes welled up. Sarah, don't be so stubborn. We're your parents. We know best. This is for the family. For your family, maybe, I retorted, my voice trembling. The one where only Alex matters. The one where Chloe is just a footnote. Well, I'm not going to let you do this. You can have your incubator, you can have your golden boy, but you will not touch Chloe's college fund. My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You are being incredibly short-sighted, Sarah. You're jeopardizing not only Alex's future, but potentially your own standing within this family. We've always been generous with you. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. The subtle threat, the veiled manipulation, was all too familiar. It was the same tactic they'd used for years to keep me in line, to ensure I played by their rules. But something had shifted. The humiliation of being dismissed, of having my daughter's dreams trampled upon, had crossed a line. The shame I usually felt was replaced by a simmering rage. Generous? I asked, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. You call demanding my daughter's entire future generous? You call belittling her aspirations generous? I don't think so. I stood up too, my hands balled into fists at my sides. The air in the dining room was charged with a tension that was palpable. Sarah looked uncomfortable, Mark's jaw was clenched, Mom was dabbing her eyes with her napkin, and Dad was glaring at me with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "This is not up for debate," my father stated, his voice like granite. "We are funding Alex's future. That money is going to him. You have 2 weeks to make the transfer. If you don't, well, let's just say there will be consequences." Consequences. The word hung in the air, a promise of further ostracization, of more pressure, of my father's immense displeasure.
But as I looked at him, at the unyielding set of his jaw, at the absolute certainty in his eyes, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't resignation. It was the quiet, steely resolve of someone who had just witnessed a fundamental truth about their family, a truth that had been hidden beneath layers of polite pretense and familial obligation. They didn't just favor Alex, they actively discounted Chloe and me. And in that moment, standing in the suffocating formality of my parents' dining room, I made a silent vow, a vow that went beyond just protecting Chloe's college fund, a vow to reclaim my dignity and to ensure that neither Chloe nor I would ever be dismissed, devalued, or controlled again. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. And I knew with a chilling certainty that this time I wouldn't be playing by their rules. The thought of their faces when they realized just how wrong they had been, just how profoundly they had underestimated me, sent a shiver of anticipation through me. It was a dark, exhilarating feeling, a stark contrast to the shame that had dominated my life for so long. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving the stunned silence and the half-eaten casserole behind me, the echo of my father's threat miming in my ears, and a brand new, dangerous kind of resolve hardening within me. I wouldn't just protect Chloe's college fund. I would build something for her, something so magnificent, so undeniable, that it would dwarf their petty ambitions and their ingrained biases. And the thought of their eventual realization, their shock, their regret, that was a prospect that made me almost smile. The $100,000 that was supposed to be Chloe's college fund, the very amount they were so casually demanding for their precious Alex, felt like a pittance compared to what I now envisioned. A pittance. And they had no idea what they were truly up against. The seeds of something far bigger, far more potent had just been sown in the fertile ground of their profound misjudgment. And the harvest, I suspected, would be spectacular. It had to be. For Chloe and for me. They always talked about legacy, about the family name, about building something that would last. My father especially. He built his empire from nothing, or so the story went. He loved recounting the late nights, the risks he took, the sacrifices he made. And Mark, my brother, was the heir apparent. He played the part perfectly, the dutiful son, the chip off the old block. Alex was just the next step, the continuation of that legacy. Chloe, my Chloe, was an afterthought, a delightful but ultimately peripheral figure in their grand design. This wasn't just about money. It was about belonging. It was about their definition of value, and how I and my daughter consistently failed to meet it. The ride home was a blur of silent tears and a churning in my stomach that had nothing to do with indigestion. I pulled into my driveway, the familiar sight of my modest little house filled with Chloe's art and her laughter, a stark contrast to the opulent emptiness of my parents' estate. Chloe was already home from her friend Maya's, drawing at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration. Seeing her, her innocent focus, my heart ached with a ferocity that threatened to break me. "Hey, sweetie," I said, forcing a smile. "How was Maya's?" She looked up, her eyes bright. "It was great, Mom. We painted these really cool fantasy creatures. Look." She held up a drawing, a vibrant, imaginative beast with wings like stained glass and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. I admired it, genuinely. "Wow, honey, that's amazing. You're so talented." She beamed, a pure, uncomplicated joy that made the knot in my stomach tighten. "Thanks, Mom. I was thinking, maybe I could try and paint something like this for Grandpa's birthday. You know, something special." My breath hitched. Grandpa. The man who just demanded her college fund. The man who thought her dreams were unrealistic. "That's a lovely thought, honey," I managed, my voice a little strained. "But maybe let's just get him a nice tie this year." Chloe's smile faltered. "Oh, okay." She went back to her drawing, a subtle cloud of disappointment settling over her. It was that flicker of hurt, that almost imperceptible dimming of her light, that ignited the slow burn of my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for her college fund anymore. I was fighting for her spirit. I spent the next few days in a fog of quiet fury. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the Thanksgiving dinner, the dismissive tone, the condescending smiles, the sheer entitlement. My father's threat about consequences echoed in my mind. What consequences? More disapproval? More emotional blackmail? I'd lived under that shadow for 38 years. It was time to step out of it. I started by calling the financial advisor who managed Chloe's college fund, a man named Mr. Abernathy, precise and professional, always had a kind word for Chloe when I brought her by. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice steady, "I need to discuss the college fund for my daughter Chloe. I've received some pressure to reallocate those funds." There was a brief pause. "Pressure, Miss Davies? From whom?" I hesitated. "My parents and my brother. They believe the fund should be used for my nephew, Alex." Mr. Abernathy was silent for a moment. "I see. Well, Miss Davies, that fund is legally established in Chloe's name. As the sole trustee and beneficiary, you have complete control over its management and disbursement. No one can force you to move those funds without your direct authorization. It is Chloe's money designated for her education." Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. It was her money, legally hers. Their demands were just that, demands, backed by emotional manipulation and the threat of family disapproval. "I understand," I said, my voice gaining strength, "and I have no intention of reallocating those funds. In fact, I'd like to explore options for growing that fund significantly. Are there any more aggressive investment strategies available? Perhaps something with a higher potential for growth, though I understand the associated risks." Mr. Abernathy's tone shifted. It was no longer just professional. It held a spark of intrigued curiosity. "Miss Davies, given the current market and your daughter's long-time horizon, there are indeed strategies that could yield significant returns. We can look at diversified portfolios, growth stocks, even some alternative investments. Of course, this would involve a greater degree of risk. But if your objective is significant growth—" "That is precisely my objective," I stated, the words hard and sharp. "I want to build Chloe's future. Not just secure it, but build it into something extraordinary, something that far surpasses any legacy my family is so obsessed with."
We scheduled a follow-up meeting for the following week. I hung up the phone, a strange, almost giddy feeling bubbling up inside me. They wanted to use Chloe's money to fund Alex's future? Fine. I'd take that $100,000, their precious seed money, and I'd make it grow, and grow, and grow. I'd show them what impact looked like. The next few days were a whirlwind of research and frantic calls. I devoured books on investing, financial markets, business strategies. I learned about venture capital, about angel investing, about the world my father so proudly inhabited. And as I delved deeper, a new picture began to emerge, one that was far more complex and disturbing than I had initially realized. It wasn't just about Alex's aptitude for tech. My father's tech incubator wasn't some benevolent startup accelerator. It was a vanity project, a playground for his ambition, funded by other people's money, including, I suspected, a significant portion of the family's assets. And my brother, Mark, was deeply involved. He wasn't just an observer, he was a player. He was the one brokering deals, making introductions, leveraging his connections. Sarah, his wife, was also playing her part, curating the image of their perfect, forward-thinking family. I stumbled upon an article online, a small piece buried in a business journal, about the early funding rounds of a company called Quantum Leap Solutions. It mentioned a key early investor, a philanthropic foundation whose trustees included my father. And a significant portion of their initial seed capital had come from a private equity firm that had ties to my family's holding company. The article spoke of aggressive expansion plans, of disruptive technologies, of projected valuations that made my head spin. Chloe's $100,000 college fund, the amount they so casually demanded, was a drop in the ocean compared to the millions being poured into this venture. And then I found it. A public filing, a minor detail in the complex web of corporate ownership, but to me, it was a bombshell. The foundation that my father chaired, which had invested heavily in Quantum Leap, had itself received a substantial anonymous donation several years prior, a donation that coincided exactly with the liquidation of a certain set of assets my parents had once held, assets that, according to my mother's occasional wistful remarks, were supposed to be for both her children. My blood ran cold. Was it possible? Had my father, in his relentless pursuit of his legacy, his impact,
quietly siphoned off funds that were meant for both Mark and me, funds that could have secured my own financial stability, that could have ensured Chloe had every opportunity without me having to scrape and save every single penny. I started digging through old family records, old tax documents that my mother kept meticulously filed away in the attic. It was a tedious, dusty process, but a desperate kind of energy propelled me forward. And there, tucked away in a box labeled Estate Planning, pre-Mark's college, I found it. A detailed ledger, handwritten by my father himself, outlining the distribution of a significant inheritance from his father, a sum far larger than anything I'd ever been told about. It clearly delineated portions allocated for Mark's future and Sarah's future. But then there was a section, faded and almost illegible, that mentioned contingent trust, daughter.
And a cryptic notation, redistributed to foundation, strategic allocation. Redistributed, strategic allocation. It wasn't a redistribution for my benefit. It was a redistribution for his incubator, for his legacy project, for Alex. He hadn't just undervalued Chloe's dreams. He had systematically robbed me, and by extension Chloe, of my inheritance, my financial security, to fund his own grand ambitions. The humiliation I'd felt at Thanksgiving was nothing compared to this gut-wrenching realization. They hadn't just dismissed us, they had systematically disinherited us. The simmering rage of the past few days erupted into a volcanic fury. This was more than favoritism. This was theft. This was a betrayal of the deepest kind. My father, the man who preached about hard work and integrity, had built his empire, his legacy, on a foundation of deceit and manipulation, and had used my own inheritance as building material. I needed proof, concrete proof that I could use. I hired a private investigator, a discreet woman named Brenda, who had a reputation for handling delicate family matters. I laid out the entire situation, the Thanksgiving dinner, the college fund demand, my suspicions about the inheritance. Brenda was quiet, professional, her eyes sharp as she listened. She assured me she would do everything she could to uncover the truth. In the meantime, I made a decision. I couldn't wait for Brenda's report. I had to start making my own moves. The power shift, I realized, wasn't going to come from confrontation or emotional appeals. It was going to come from leverage, from knowledge, from their own greed and ambition turned against them. I called my brother Mark. It was a rare call. We rarely spoke beyond polite pleasantries at family gatherings. "Hey Mark," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Sarah, to what do I owe the pleasure?" His tone was polite, but there was a hint of wariness. He knew our parents favored me, but he also knew I was the less compliant sibling. "I wanted to talk about Mom and Dad, about Thanksgiving." He sighed, a faint rustle of fabric audible over the phone. "Look, Sarah, I know you're upset about the college fund, but they have good intentions. Alex is talented and they want to support him. It's what families do." "Is it?" I asked, a hint of steel in my voice. "Because I've been doing some research, Mark, about Quantum Leap, about how those investments were funded. It's fascinating." There was a beat of silence, a different kind of silence this time, one that felt heavy with unspoken truths. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice suddenly tighter. "Oh, I think you do," I countered, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. I know about the anonymous donations. I know about the strategic allocations. I know about what was supposed to be a contingent trust for me. Funny how that trust seems to have disappeared and reappeared as seed capital for Dad's pet project." The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could almost picture him, standing in his pristine modern home, his carefully constructed composure cracking. "You're making wild accusations, Sarah," he finally managed, his voice strained. "Am I?" I asked softly. "Because I think I'm about to have a lot of proof. And you, Mark, you're right in the thick of it, aren't you? You're the one running deals, leveraging family connections."
"You're benefiting from this, aren't you? From Dad's strategic allocation of my inheritance." Another long pause, then a low, ragged breath. "What do you want, Sarah?" The question hung in the air. It was the sound of his carefully maintained world beginning to crumble. He knew I had him. He knew I had leverage. And he knew that if this came out, it wouldn't just tarnish his father's reputation, it would taint his own carefully crafted image, his own complicity. "For now," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "I want you to tell me everything. Everything about Quantum Leap, about the funding, about how much of my inheritance actually ended up in that incubator. And then we'll talk about what happens next, because Mark, you and I are in this together now. whether you like it or not. The conversation that followed was the most revealing and the most damning of my life. Mark, under duress, confessed the extent of my father's deception. He admitted that the contingent trust had indeed been diverted years ago, rebranded as strategic investment to mask the truth. He confirmed that a significant portion of the family's liquid assets that should have been divided equally between him and me, had been funneled into Quantum Leap, with my father justifying it as an investment in future family prosperity. Mark hadn't been entirely ignorant. He'd been a willing participant, blinded by ambition and the allure of wealth, but also intimidated by his father's sheer force of will. He admitted that the $100,000 they were demanding for Alex's fund was a paltry sum compared to the millions that had been moved. They were trying to set a precedent, to test my compliance, and to secure a small but symbolic victory. As Mark spoke, the anger in me shifted, hardening into something colder, something more strategic. They thought they were in control, pulling the strings, dictating terms. They thought I was a pawn, easily manipulated. But they had underestimated me, just as they had underestimated Chloe. They had underestimated my capacity for pain, for righteous fury, and for a meticulously planned, devastating revenge. By the time Brenda's report landed in my inbox a few days later, I had a plan. A comprehensive, multifaceted plan. Brenda had confirmed the financial transfers, the creation of the foundation, and the substantial uncredited donations that funded it. She'd even found evidence of my father's personal accounts being anonymously bolstered by funds from the foundation, essentially paying himself back for his strategic allocation. The proof was undeniable. My father hadn't just taken my inheritance, he had profited from it, using it to build the very empire he flaunted. I looked at the figures, the sheer scale of the deception. It was staggering. And it was all tied to Quantum Leap, to Alex's supposed future, to their perceived legacy. They wanted to control my money, my daughter's future, through intimidation and manipulation. Well, I would use their own greed and deceit to bring that all crashing down. The humiliation they inflicted would be nothing compared to the public implosion of their carefully crafted facade. The cliffhanger wasn't the demand for the money anymore. It was the dawning realization that I held the keys to their destruction. The $100,000 they wanted for Alex, it was merely the spark. The real firestorm was about to begin, and they had no idea I was even holding the matches.
The silence from their end was a fragile peace, a temporary lull before the storm I was about to unleash. They were waiting for me to capitulate, to hand over the money. They had no idea I was about to demand everything back, and then some. The weight of their betrayal was heavy, but the promise of justice, of retribution, was a powerful, intoxicating force. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play. The air in my house felt different after that call with Mark. It was thick with a newfound power, a quiet hum of anticipation that vibrated beneath my skin. The fawning smiles, the condescending whispers, the dismissive waves of my hand, they were all etched into my memory, not as scars, but as fuel. Chloe, my sweet, oblivious Chloe, was sketching at the kitchen table, her tongue poking out in concentration, utterly unaware that the storm brewing around her was about to reshape her world and shatter theirs. She was the reason. She was the immovable object against their irresistible force. Their legacy, their name, their meticulously constructed empire built on lies and my stolen inheritance, it was all about to face an audit it would never survive. My next move was deliberate, calculated, and frankly, terrifyingly exhilarating. I didn't confront my parents directly. I didn't lash out in a fit of righteous anger, even though every fiber of my being screamed for it. Instead, I began to meticulously unravel their empire, thread by painstaking thread, starting with the weakest link, the one they thought was their golden boy, Alex, and the incubator that was supposed to be his launchpad. I reached out to a few contacts from my brief disillusioned stint in corporate law before I left the city. Not the sharks who reveled in cutthroat litigation, but the quiet ones, the forensic accountants, the experts in corporate malfeasance, the ones who saw the beauty in the dissection of financial deceit. I presented them with Brenda's report, Mark's confession, and the dusty ledger from my father's attic. I told them the story, not with tears, but with a chilling clarity, the cold, hard facts of my father's systematic theft and his son's complicity.
The initial retainer was substantial, but it was a calculated investment. I liquidated some of my personal assets, not the money my parents had grudgingly set aside for me years ago, but the modest savings I'd painstakingly accumulated myself. It felt like a defiance, a statement of independence. This was my fight, and I would fund it myself, just as I had funded Chloe's college fund against their wishes. The experts were intrigued. The scale of the potential financial crimes, the intertwined family dynamics, the sheer audacity of it all. It was a case that promised not just financial reward, but a satisfying unraveling of a powerful insular world. While they worked, I watched. I observed the subtle shifts in my parents' demeanor. My father, usually so bombastic, became quieter, more prone to brief, irritable pronouncements. My mother, ever the gracious hostess, seemed to be nursing a perpetual anxiety, her smile strained, her eyes darting nervously. Mark and Sarah, on the other hand, were radiating an almost desperate performative happiness, their social media feeds filled with staged photos of blissful family outings, their carefully curated image starting to fray at the edges, a desperate attempt to project an illusion of perfection that was already crumbling.
They were like actors on a stage, acutely aware that the audience had begun to see the seams. The pivotal moment, the one that shifted the ground beneath all of us, arrived not with a bang, but with a chillingly polite email from my legal team. It was a formal notice, addressed to my father, my mother, Mark, and Sarah. It outlined the findings of their investigation, citing the public filings, the bank transfers, the foundation's questionable funding, and crucially, the existence of the contingent trust daughter and its subsequent strategic redistribution. It detailed the alleged misappropriation of funds, the potential for securities fraud, and the significant sums that had been siphoned from what should have been my inheritance, and by extension, Chloe's security, to fund Quantum Leap and my father's personal ventures. The email concluded with a simple, stark demand: the immediate restitution of all misappropriated funds with accrued interest, a full accounting of all assets derived from the aforementioned funds, and a substantial settlement for emotional distress and financial hardship. It was accompanied by a list of proposed terms for a private resolution designed to avoid public scandal. They had the leverage, and they knew it. The silence that followed that email was deafening. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of their opulent estate, out of their carefully constructed lives. My parents, who had always wielded their wealth and influence like weapons, were suddenly on the defensive. They were facing something they couldn't control, something that threatened to expose the rot at the heart of their legacy. The first crack appeared when Mark called me, his voice hoarse, devoid of its usual practiced calm. "Sarah," he choked out, "what in God's name have you done?" "I've simply asked for what is rightfully mine, Mark," I replied, my voice steady, cutting through his panic. "And what's rightfully Chloe's. You know this. You admitted this. You were complicit." "Complicit? We were all following Dad's lead. He told us this was for the family's future, for our legacy." "Your legacy, Mark, not mine, not Chloe's. You were so busy chasing Dad's shadow, so eager to inherit his empire, that you didn't realize he was robbing you blind too, just in a different way. He used our shared inheritance as his personal ATM for his vanity projects, and you let him. You benefited from it. You were happy to let me and Chloe be sidelined, forgotten, while he built his empire on our backs." His breathing was ragged. "He's going to destroy us all, Sarah. He's going to go down, and he's going to take us all with him. The foundation, Quantum Leap, everything. It's all built on shaky ground. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before you dismissed Chloe's dreams, before you demanded her college fund," I said, the words sharp and final. "This is what happens when you build on lies, Mark. The foundation crumbles." The subsequent days were a whirlwind of frantic phone calls and desperate maneuvering from my family's side. My father, for the first time in my life, seemed genuinely terrified. His bluster had evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating fear. He tried to issue threats, to leverage his remaining influence, but it was too late. The evidence was too substantial, too damning. The legal team had him cornered. My mother, predictably, called me in tears. "Sarah, darling," she sobbed, her voice trembling.
"Please, you must listen to your father. This is all a misunderstanding. Your father, he just wanted the best for all of us, for the family name. You can't do this to us, to your father."
"Mom," I said, my voice softening slightly, but the steel remained.
The best for the family name apparently didn't include me or Chloe. It included my inheritance being funneled into his pet projects while I struggled to build something stable for my daughter. He didn't want the best for us. He wanted the easiest path for himself, and he used us to pave it. But your father, she whispered, her voice breaking. His legacy. His legacy, Mom, I interrupted, my voice gaining strength with every word, was built on a lie. And now, that lie is about to be exposed. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for what is owed. And for Chloe, I'm asking for a future that isn't dependent on the whims and manipulations of others. The pressure mounted. Mark and Sarah, realizing the full extent of the legal repercussions and the potential damage to their own reputations, began to waver. They saw their meticulously crafted image of success and prosperity teetering on the brink of ruin. They had always been willing to play the game, but the stakes had suddenly become too high. They were suddenly eager for a quiet resolution, a tidy sum to make the problem disappear, a way to salvage what they could from the wreckage of their father's empire. My father, cornered and defiant, initially refused any settlement. He railed against my betrayal, against my ungratefulness, against the audacity of daring to challenge his authority. He threatened to fight, to drag it all through the courts, to expose me as a greedy opportunist. But my legal team was relentless. They presented him with irrefutable evidence of his financial malfeasance, the trail of stolen funds, the falsified documents, the chilling admission from his own son. The threat of a public trial, with every lurid detail laid bare for the world to see, was a weapon too potent to ignore. The carefully constructed image of the philanthropic, self-made titan of industry would be shattered, replaced by that of a ruthless swindler. The turning point came during a tense, mediated negotiation. My father sat across the table, his face a mask of cold fury, his eyes like chips of ice. My mother sat beside him, looking defeated, her usual vivaciousness extinguished. Mark and Sarah were there too, their faces pale and drawn, their desperation palpable. The terms of the settlement were dictated not by me, but by the cold, hard realities of the legal documents. My father was to return every penny of the misappropriated funds, with a significant interest rate that was almost double the initial amount. He was also to establish a trust, irrevocably funded, for Chloe's future, far exceeding the initial $100,000 demand, and with provisions for her entire life. A substantial portion of the family's business assets, those not directly tied to the fraudulent schemes, were to be liquidated and the proceeds divided, a significant chunk going to me, and a smaller but still substantial amount to Mark, contingent on his full cooperation and silence moving forward. Quantum Leap, the incubator that was supposed to be Alex's golden ticket, was to be dissolved, its assets liquidated to cover restitution, with any remaining funds going towards compensating investors who had been misled.
Alex's future, once so brightly painted by my father, was now a blank canvas, the paint all but gone. My father, his pride shattered, his empire dismantled, his legacy tarnished beyond repair, finally capitulated. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic confessions, just a defeated nod, a curt "fine," and a signed document that sealed his fate and began the process of dismantling the illusion he had so carefully maintained for decades. The day the final settlement papers were signed felt anticlimactic, almost surreal. I walked out of the lawyer's office, the harsh glare of the afternoon sun feeling like a benediction. The weight that had pressed down on me for so long, the constant gnawing anxiety, the feeling of being an outsider in my own family, had lifted. It was replaced by a profound, almost unsettling quiet. I drove home, the city streets a blur. As I pulled into my driveway, Chloe was on the porch swing, reading a book, her brow furrowed in concentration. The world outside this little house was a chaotic mess of shattered dreams and exposed truths, but here, inside these walls, there was a fragile peace. "Mom," she called out, her face lighting up as she saw me. She jumped off the swing and ran towards me, her arms wrapping around my waist. "You're home." I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, the sweet, innocent scent that was my anchor. "I am, sweetie," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. Tears not of sadness, but of exhaustion, of relief, of a profound, hard-won victory. Later that evening, after Chloe was asleep, her dreams undoubtedly filled with fantastical creatures and vibrant colors, I sat on the porch. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine from the nearby woods. I looked up at the stars, scattered like diamonds across the inky blackness. They seemed so distant, so untouchable.
much like the legacy my family had so desperately clung to. My father was a broken man, his empire reduced to ashes, his name synonymous with deceit. Mark and Sarah were left to pick through the debris, their own futures uncertain, tainted by their father's sins and their own complicity. My mother was left to navigate the wreckage of a life built on a gilded lie. And me? I had nothing but the quiet strength of my own resilience and the fierce, unwavering love for my daughter. The money, the restitution, the financial security, it was all just a byproduct. The real victory was the liberation, the freedom from their judgment, their manipulation, their suffocating expectations. I had refused to be a footnote in their grand narrative. I had rewritten the ending. The silence of the night was broken only by the distant chirp of crickets. It was a peaceful sound, a sound of continuity, of life going on. I took a deep breath, a long, slow exhale that felt like the release of a lifetime of held-in pain and anger. The sun would rise tomorrow, a new day, a new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt entirely, beautifully, and irrevocably mine. The control was absolute, the reckoning complete. This was not an ending, but a new, unwritten chapter, and I held the pen.